Wait, you have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV.
Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hey everybody, welcome. It's Ken Reed, your TV guidance counselor, here on the show, TV Guidance Counselor. But you knew that already, because presumably you didn't stumble upon this. It's not like you can flip through channels of podcasts and just go, oh, what's this? Maybe you can. If you can, let me know at ken@icanread.com or tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com, because that would be news to me. But here's what's news to you. This is a brand new episode, as we have each and every week. And if you're new to the show, I am a on hiatus Boston stand-up comedian, and I've been doing this show for 7 years. And what happens is somebody picks an old issue of TV Guide magazine from my vast collection of TV Guide magazines, as any normal person has. They go through and pick what they'd watched that week in history. Then we talk about it. It's just that simple. And this week, this one's a long time coming. Speaking of Boston comedians, my guest is Gary Gulman, and Gary's a guy that I've known for a decade, probably, and is actually one of the very first people I asked to do the show back in February 2014, and he's very busy. You may have heard of his amazingly great, hugely successful special, The Great Depresh. Gary's been very busy, but he found time to sit down and talk to me about television, and it was a great chat. And you know what? It was the right time. I'm glad we did it when we did, and it was fantastic. Gary's a great dude, and it was a great chance to sit down and talk to him for an extended period of time. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Gary Gulman.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Gary Gulman, how are you, sir?
I'm terrific. I'm so glad we finally were able to make this work. I had some technical issues and things, and so I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to doing this for a long time. There's a lot of overlap in our passions.
It's true. It's true, for better or worse, for your end. You're one of the first people I think I asked about doing the show when I started. So it's been a while, and I'm glad that we get to do it.
Yeah, I'm honored.
Thank you, global pandemic, for making this happen. So when I asked you about doing it, you said you wanted something from 1987, and I feel like you specified fall 1987.
Yes.
Is there a reason why?
There was definitely a reason. I initially, when we were planning on doing it this particular summer, I'm writing a book called K through 12, and it's a memoir of my school years. And I was writing about 10th grade, which at the end of 10th grade, and I was moving on to 11th grade when I was last writing this. So September 1987 was when I started 11th grade, and I wanted to get into that mindset, and which I would have to anyhow to write it. So I thought that was really, really ideal.
Did it help?
It definitely helped, because so much, and this is probably sad, so much of my sorting of years was based on when certain things aired, what was going on TV shows, and when certain films were released. So I know the movie I went to on my first sort of date, and I was able to pinpoint when exactly I would have gone, because you can look up when it was released. So it's been so helpful to have access to the memories of what I saw and enjoyed at the time, and also the internet to back up. But sometimes, as you probably know, you remember things happening at completely different years, and you think, I was that old when that happened, or that young when it happened. It's always very surprising.
Yeah, sometimes they'll conflate, or you're like, I swore it was this thing, and it isn't. What was the movie? I'm curious.
The movie was called Roxanne, and it was Steve Martin's take on the Cyrano de Bergerac story. So the other interesting thing related to TV is, yesterday I had to figure out what was going on, because I've now I'm on first grade. I'm writing about first grade. I had to figure out what was what was on at my bedtime that I would. The interesting thing about a kid watching TV is you're watching the credits, which you do not care about at all because it's part of the time you're allowed to stay up until. And as soon as those credits are over, it's bedtime. So I for instance, know the post-production supervisor of Rhoda because I was concentrating on this and knew that as soon as it was over, it was off to bed.
I don't have any children, and I don't know if you have had children since the last time I saw you,
No.
but I don't think so.
Nope.
But I always wonder what parents do now when they don't have TV shows to tell their kids bedtime is, because you can watch anything whenever. But for us, it was like, after Rhoda, it's bedtime.
Yes.
And now
Yeah.
they're like, well, I can watch it whenever I want, so there is no bedtime.
Yes, it was Happy Days on Tuesday nights and different shows each night of the week. They were all based on bedtimes. And if there was either no school or a snow announcement or an illness, then I was allowed to watch these racy shows like Three's Company or Night Court, and it was very exciting.
I remember, and I don't know if you did this too, I would tell time by TV shows, meaning, say we're driving to my grandfather's house, and I'd be like, how long is this going to take? And my dad would be like, like 2 shows. So it's like an hour, because that's how long I knew what time was.
Yeah, this show, this will take as long as The White Shadow.
Yes, this will be 1 White Shadow or 1 James at 15 or 2 Rhodas.
2 Rhodas or a season finale of Rhoda.
High school takes 752 Rhodas. That's how long. It'd be great if Catholic churches in confession they gave that out to you, like instead of Hail Marys, you do like 6 Rhodas, or like some sort of court was just like, you are sentenced to 7,000 Rhodas.
It's so great. What a great name for a TV show, Rhoda. And they wouldn't have called it that unless she had built up a following on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I mean, it's such a funny name.
Yeah, I've never met a Rhoda.
No, I've never met a Rhoda in my life, and yet it's the perfect name for for that woman. And yet I don't know if Valerie Harper was even a Jewish woman.
I don't think she is, and I don't think she is. She's very New Yorky.
Yeah, I remember there was a terrific Saturday Night Live spoof of the Mary Tyler Moore Show where Ed Asner tried to rescue Mary from reruns, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus played Rhoda perfectly. It was awesome.
I met her once, Valerie Harper, and it was
really.
Oh yeah, I used to tell this on stage, but it bummed everybody out too much. But she had the show Valerie in the 80s.
Yes.
And she got fired from her own show, if you remember. And they killed her off, like just totally unceremoniously. They had shot the first episode of that season and killed her off halfway through shooting it. So they reshot stuff without her, and the script wasn't written to have her dead. So the way they introduced it, so this is the first episode back after the summer, and the show starts. It's like going on for 2 minutes.
The Hogans.
Yeah, it turned into the Hogans. They replaced her with Sandy Duncan, who I hate to this day for that. But the way they put it in there was Jason Bateman goes 2 minutes of the episode. He goes, things just aren't the same since Mom died.
Wow.
And I was like 8 or 9 years old and was like, what the hell? What's happened? So it was very traumatic. And I used to work at WBZ, Channel 4 here in Boston when I was in college. And one of the jobs I would get is if like a celebrity came in, I had to like be their assistant for the day, basically. And I met Judge Judy, who was very nice. Dr. Phil, piece of shit. But one was Valerie Harper, and she was super cool, and I was hanging out with her all day, and she's telling me Second City stories and, about working on Freebie and the Bean and all this stuff. And we're just kind of chatting, and I start talking about Valerie, and totally inadvertently, I start tearing up. Oh. Like a lunatic. Like, I don't cry ever.
Lunatic, that's a man who cares.
And she just hugged me.
Oh,
which was very nice of her, but it might be the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to me.
oh, it's a beautiful story. I love that. I love that story. Was she fired over a contract dispute?
Yeah, because she was like, it's my show. I want a executive producer credit. And they're like, no. And she's like, the show is my name. And they're like, oh, bye.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. Like that was, what was the company? Miller Boyette was the company that did it. And they were pulling a lot of weird moves at ABC at the time. But man, yeah, they were like,
well, they had all the networks had so much power and they were, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was the joke for years. It was like, we'll just replace you with Sandy Duncan. Like you could do it to anyone. Like doctor right in the middle of surgery. He's like, I'm a doctor. I'm doing heart surgery. And they're like, we don't care. We replaced Valerie on our own show. We'll get Sandy Duncan in here to do it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So it's traumatic.
This is a perfect segue because I did have Valerie in there on
cool.
As a choice this week. So
let's dive in. Let's start on Saturday.
Okay.
And you had said you had done some Saturday morning stuff.
Now it was on a little bit later where I grew up in Massachusetts, but I know that it was always opposite my mother's weekly hairdressing appointment. My mother would go, women of her age would get their hair set. They would have it done, and then, I don't know, they would just avoid water for a week. But the point is that this show was pretty racy as far as the women wear very revealing clothes for a Saturday morning. And I wouldn't have felt comfortable if my mother was in the other room during this. But anyhow, at 10 a.m., I would watch Soul Train.
Yes, which was hard to see in Boston. And I used to have to get it from the Rhode Island station because Boston was like, we're not showing fucking Soul Train. We're going to show Candlepin Bowling.
Wow, that's so funny. Yeah, I forget when it aired in Boston, but it was really our only access to hip hop and R&B for a while. It was really something else. I love that show.
I had Brenda Bennett on, who was in Apollonia 6 and Vanity 6. She's the white one that,
Okay.
But she's from Rhode Island.
Uh-huh.
And there's an episode of Soul Train where they're on, I think it's Vanity 6 is on, and Don Cornelius is like, Brenda, where are you from? And she's like, I'm from Boston. And he's like, oh, yeah, we don't air in Boston. It's like this whole thing. It's very weird.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I must have gotten it on a UHF or something because I watched. I was a dutiful watcher every week of Soul Train.
I wonder if you got it from New Hampshire or something because you were up in Peabody, right?
Yeah, maybe it was Channel 10 or something like that. But whatever it was, I was able to watch it, and it was where Run DMC first was on, and it was such a great show. It was before MTV Raps, so there was no access to hip hop. At 11 a.m., I loved this cartoon called Dungeons and Dragons.
Yep.
Now I was only 17, which you would say, hey, enough with the cartoons at 17. But that was a pretty advanced cartoon. It was expert Dungeons and Dragons, and there was some fear, and the antagonist was pretty scary, and I really enjoyed they had the unicorn, which was for kids, but really it was a good adolescent show, Dungeons and Dragons.
It was very teenage. There was one character who was a child, but the rest of them were teenagers. Yeah. And the unicorn was voiced by Frank Welker, who did Scooby-Doo's voice.
He does everything. Frank Welker is prolific. Yeah.
He's one of the highest paid people in Hollywood. And literally everything he did in that show was, blah! That was it. He got paid. It's like, that's a good gig. And Donnie Most from Happy Days did one of the voices as well.
Yes. I remember seeing his name at the end of that. But yeah, Frank Welker is in the credits of so many shows. So that takes us to Saturday.
Oh, one thing about Dungeons and Dragons that you might find interesting is there's a lost final episode that they wrote and never aired where it turns out they're all dead. And for years, people thought it was an urban legend, but it surfaced. The script surfaced. And when they put the whole series out on DVD, they put the script in with it. And they're all in this like purgatory.
Oh my gosh, you are such a maven. I'm always blown away by your knowledge. So we don't. I just remember as a 17-year-old, Saturdays we would probably rent a movie, and so I wouldn't watch TV on that first Saturday because there doesn't. I would watch Saturday Night Live at 11:30. For sure.
And this was prime years, 87. I mean, this was great stuff. Oh my
gosh. It was really great stuff at that point. Although I'm not one of these people who the Saturday Night Live is not what it once was. I always think it's as good as anything else on TV. And then
this one is a rerun with Willie Nelson hosting, by the way.
Oh yeah. I would be turned off by Willie Nelson at that point in my life because I didn't respond to country music nor Willie Nelson's vibe, but I would watch that with more energy now. But we move ahead to Sunday morning at 10 a.m. I would always watch CBS This Morning.
I still do.
Yeah,
every Sunday.
It was with Charles Kuralt at the time. And I really, I mean, it skewed older than I was at that time, but I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that show. And it always seemed like very decent people were involved in the stories. And there was a lot of, I fancied myself sort of a thinker back then. So I really enjoyed Sunday with Charles Kuralt. He just had a good vibe with him. And then
he would do those segments too where he would drive around in that Winnebago and like do stories about Americans. And a bunch of them are up on YouTube now, and they're fascinating because the time he was doing that was like late 70s into the late 80s.
Yeah.
And he sort of inadvertently captured this transition of America because he's traveling through these Rust Belt states, and it's a really interesting time where you're seeing these like ghost towns die and new things start, and it's pretty fascinating. They're really fun and / depressing to rewatch. Yeah,
he seemed to be a very thoughtful, caring man, and I mean maybe it's show business, but I bought into it. I just found him very, very soothing and I really enjoyed that show. So then at 8 p.m. on Sunday night, I was an early adopter of Married with Children. I really thought it was edgy and different than everything else. And by that time I had sort of moved on from family ties, but the thing that really stands out to me on Sunday night at 8:00 is that I loved This Old House, and I remember the first season it came on. I didn't really understand the concept. I must have been 8 or 9, and I really believed that this man was building his house and he was going to live there. And the very last episode, it turns out that Bob Vila was leaving. He wasn't going to get to stay at this house, which he seemed to have put so much energy and love and things. And I remember I cried.
So you thought it was like The Giving Tree.
Yeah, exactly. It just didn't seem fair that this guy had put in so much energy into this house, and then he was just going to move on. I didn't understand his connection with this show. I guess I didn't see I must not have seen the first episode, but it was very, I know this expression is probably cliche now, but it was very on brand for my mother, which is that she loved nothing more than to drive us to communities near us who were much more affluent than us. They were always within a 15-minute drive. But my mom we would drive by, and these were, I mean, compared to our dwelling, they were castles. and they would have walls and fences, and she would point out the special features of this architecture. And it's the same type of philosophy or mindset of the person who's on a diet watching food cooking shows, and that was us. And I thought it was just torture. And I remember when we would have to drive through this neighborhood from the highway to get to our section of Peabody, and it was this town of Linfield, these beautiful homes. And I remember the first time I drove my girlfriend in college home, and I was so tempted to either speed at 90 miles an hour through this neighborhood or put her in a blindfold. I felt it would be so cruel to make this girl think that she was going to a well-off young man. It was just such a tease to go through these homes that were just that they were owned by celebrities of that time. So a Boston Bruin, I know that Matt Siegel of Kiss 108 owned one of the homes, and so they were not enormous celebrities. They weren't Prince, but they were, to us, that's Eddie Andelman's house.
This guy owns Davio's or something like that. You know, it would be yeah. And I don't know if your mother did this too, but we used to do that too. We'd drive through, and there was a very fine line, though, especially my dad, between being in awe of these houses and being really mad. So it'd be like, oh, look at that house. Look at that asshole. Like, it would just be like, whoa, what happened? It was just like slightly too nice. And then all of a sudden it was like, fuck that guy. Instead of just like, that's a cool house. It was just, still don't know what turned it.
That's terrific. My mother, who is like she has the persona sometimes of a vaudeville comedian. She has shtick, so that every time we would turn around in a driveway in these neighborhood, she would say the same thing. She would say, "Pick up the socks, Harry. We have company." And then she would pull out, and it was cute for a long time, then irritating, and now once again cute. It's come full circle, but that was my mother's. Now at 9 o'clock on Sunday night, there were movies and TV shows, and I really couldn't find anything that I wanted to watch until 9:30 when the Tracy Ullman show came on, which again was way ahead of its time, and probably a lot of it was over my head, because I think that the term meta would be used to describe a lot of things that were going on with Tracy Ullman then. But I'm not sure if in 1987 they were doing the Simpsons shorts, though I think they may have been, but
this was the first year of Fox, 1987, and this year Fox was only on 2 nights a week. They called it Fox Weekend Television. It was only on Saturday and Sunday, and that was because their business model was kind of fascinating, because they wanted to launch a new network, but you couldn't just buy a bunch of stations. Like, that would be totally prohibitive. So what they did was they used syndication as a model, and they went to all these individual UHF stations in different markets and said, basically, we're going to rent your Saturday night. Then we're going to rent your Sunday night. And then as they got bigger, they started doing more nights, and then eventually bought the stations, which was just unheard of, bizarre way to do a network. Yeah. And the Tracy Ullman show was a really weird show for them to take. And it was strange because there was a character she did that was a teenage girl that you might remember. I think her name was like Francesca, but she had 2 gay dads, and they didn't play it for laughs. It was just like part of the character. It was a totally normal thing that they were just like, yeah, no, that's just how she is. And then they also would do dramatic sketches sometimes. Yes. So it would be, pardon that phone, I don't know who the hell that is. I tried to get rid of my landline, and it was cheaper to have cable landline. Yes. And the guy goes, well, just keep it and unplug it. I'm like, But
It's expression.
yeah, but they would have dramatic sketches sometimes. So they would just be like little blackout sort of dramatic scenes that were really good. But I've never seen that in a sketch show before or after.
Right. And a teenage boy didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah. Still doesn't.
Yeah.
You passed up the Jerry Lewis telethon that night.
Well, I was, it's so funny because I was writing about this too the other day because I was talking about it always meant school was about to start. So I already resented it being on TV. And then my mother, and I always found him to just, the word to describe him I always used was oily.
Yeah.
He seemed very oily. He was sweating, his hair was greased. And my mother would say he's a phony creep. And my mother had pretty good taste and was pretty perceptive about people. And she didn't, we weren't watching his movies. We were a Peter Sellers family. We would watch Peter Sellers over and over again. Jerry Lewis, my mother could not tolerate for a moment. She just found him despicable. So now we go to Monday night, and I have at 8:00.
This is Labor Day.
Yeah, it's Labor Day, so who knows what I'd be doing. I know that at 7:30 I would be watching Evening Magazine, and then at 8 p.m. I love this show, and I realized that I wasn't the demographic for it, but Kate and Allie.
I love it.
I loved it. It was a family that I kind of connected with because I was living it with a single mom, and I loved the dynamic between Kate and Allie, and that they were raising their kids sort of as a team. And I thought the girls were adorable, and the little boy was cool, and he wasn't precocious or smart alecky. I thought it was a really well done. I also just thought it seemed very authentic to my world at the time, and I really connected with that show, and I don't hear a lot of people talk about it as either influential, but I believe it had to have been.
It was. I mean, the Monday night CBS lineup, which CBS was traditionally like the old people network, but as a kid, I was a diehard Monday night person. You had Kate and Allie, Designing Women, Newhart, like all these shows that were just really smart and kind of timeless. And Kate and Allie, I always loved Jane Curtin, fellow Bostonian. And it's a really timeless show, and I rewatch it often, and especially I recommend it to people who are trying to write comedy or scripts, because they sometimes will write it off because it's a multicam sitcom. But I'm like, it's literally just great characters and dialogue. There's nothing else hanging this show, and it works. And it's so hard to do that right. And that show did it. They had a real relationship, to your point. They felt like friends. Those cold opens where they would just be walking around New York chatting. There was no laugh track. It was just such a cool show, and it holds up. I've rewatched them, and they're really great.
Yeah, man, I mean, it wasn't shticky. I was so sick of shticky television at that point. So at 8:30, I wanted to watch Valerie,
which was a decent show. It was the first season.
I loved Rhoda. I found her very beautiful and very relatable, and I loved Jason Bateman since he had been on Silver Spoons, I think, and then It's Your Move, I think it was called, which was this short-lived TV series that I could not believe wasn't a huge hit. It really, everyone I knew watched it and loved it, and he was a real con artist, jerk, wise ass, and maybe that was the issue. He wasn't likable to mainstream audiences, but I adored that. I thought it was way ahead of its time.
I think that was the problem. I think he was like a Ferris Bueller type character 2 years before that movie came out. And he was what, especially teenage boys, you kind of aspired to be this wise ass, smartest kid in the room, always getting the upper hand on everybody. And adults don't want to watch that. They don't want to watch And so it was before they really realized they could market shows to teenagers that weren't Saturday morning shows, and where people could watch a show where the main character wasn't, he was likable because Bateman's charming and everything, but wasn't necessarily always a good person.
Right. Yeah.
It was great. And Valerie, actually, this first season, they were the first show in network history to say the word condom.
Wow.
And this was 87.
Wow. That is some great trivia.
Yeah, because Bateman was going to have sex with his girlfriend at the time, and Valerie has a talk with him, and she mentions how he should get some condoms. And then later, they did an AIDS episode. That's one of the cruelest things I've ever seen in my life, where, again, one of the characters who played Jason Bateman's friend had a contract dispute with the producers. So they kind of fired him, but they still had him under contract. So he wasn't on the show for like 2 years. They bring him back, and the episode is literally Jason Bateman and one of his buddies are shooting some video for college, and they run into their friend who we haven't seen for 2 seasons. And they're like, "Hey man, where you been?" And he's like, "Oh, I've been in Europe and whatever." So then they turn around and he's gone, and they ask one of the doctors, they're like, "Hey, where did that guy go?" And he goes, "I went over there with the rest of the AIDS patients." And they're like, "What?" And so he goes, "Yeah, I got AIDS from some chick in Europe." And then he dies. He dies like by the end of the episode.
Wow.
Just like, what?
That's so ham-handed. It's so tacky. My word.
It was so crass. And there were other shows that had AIDS episodes at the same time, like Designing Women and Mr. Belvedere, that handled it in like a human way that was, let's talk about this thing. And this was clearly just like the producers being like, "Oh, you want to play hardball? Fuck you. You got AIDS from some chick. Now you're dead."
Wow.
It was shocking.
That is, and the Boston accent is warranted there.
Yeah, even though they weren't from Boston, I feel like all asshole producers have to be like that.
That's a very Boston thing. so then 9 o'clock, this was the highlight of my week, which was Newhart.
Yeah.
I grew up loving Bob Newhart as the Bob Newhart show, and then his comedy, and then this show came on, and it felt like all great shows that it was written with my sense of humor in mind, and it was just so well done. And again, I wasn't the target demographic for it, except that it was clever, character driven, sort of esoteric sort of comedy, and I really enjoyed it. And for my 50th birthday, I became friendly with Julia Duffy, who just
she's a buddy of mine as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
I love Julia. Yeah.
Yeah, she's so lovely and generous and warm, and she was on a video, and then at the very end of the video, because of her connection, was Bob Newhart wishing me a happy 50th birthday.
Oh, that's amazing!
And I welled up. I couldn't get over it. I don't have many people who I would faint if I that level, just because there are only a handful. I mean, like most people do, that there are a handful of people who you just will be speechless around, and Bob Newhart is one, and that show just meant everything to me. It was always something that I don't know if you did this, but I would retell the jokes the next day at school and get laughs, and it was just and also I was a snob about the people who would just repeat the catchphrases. We all know Larry, Daryl. We all know that. You got to go deeper for my Newhart discussion.
Yeah, I mean, and weirdly, it's in here somewhere. But for my 40th, Julia sent me a package she sent me some of her Newhart scripts and some other Newhart stuff.
Oh, word.
But she's the best.
Oh, that's great.
But the Peter Scolari lines were always the best on that show. Like, there's a joke I remember where the producers made him obsessed with this really obscure horror movie called The Boogans. And he would bring it up like every other episode. And there's one where he comes in and he goes, Stephanie, you know that Fellini festival that's going on at the theater at the college? And she goes, yes. And he goes, well, it's finally over. And they're showing the Boogans. It's like this hilarious thing. It's so funny. And there's one where he comes in and he cracks up Newhart. And that's when I've seen the episode so many times because it's like my comfort show. And
Yeah.
I like now to watch to see when Scolari's the only one who gets Newhart to crack up. And you can see it in the takes because they'll just have to cut right before you know he's going to laugh. And there's one where Scolari comes in and he goes, Dick, Lady Dick, to Mary Fran. It's so funny. It's just, yeah, that show is perfect.
Yeah, I mean those characters were so defined and so deep and yet so shallow. And the other thing that I loved was those lines that he could be so insulting to Dick, and then I remember there was one episode where Stephanie was very upset and she was stomping her feet, but Michael said stomping her size 4s, and he said to Dick, well, what do you do when your wife stomps her gunboats?
Yeah.
Such a subtle yet passive aggressive, such an insult. Just beautiful.
It's perfect.
Beautiful writing, and so that would pretty much take us into Tuesday. I don't know that there was anything at I wasn't a Designing Women fan for whatever reason. It would always let me down when I would watch it. And then
did you have this as a fellow New Englander? Did you have like a weird visceral physical aversion to Southern shows?
Yes.
What is that? It was like you just couldn't even stomach it.
That's a great point. That's exactly it. I didn't like Dukes of Hazzard. I was turned off by the sensibility and it all seemed so phony.
Yeah, or just like so alien. You're like, what the hell is this? Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. Had no problem with New York.
Nope.
Had no problem with Los Angeles, Milwaukee,
Chicago.
I got it. Yeah, Chicago, Southern shows. What a great insight, Ken.
Thank you.
All right, so we move on to Tuesday night, where am I going fast enough? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no. There's no set pace. It's different for everyone.
Okay, so
there is an amazing ad in here while you're looking on Tuesday night for the Swiss Colony that has one of the most disgusting looking cakes I've ever seen in my life. The Dobosh Tort that they're selling. And it looks horrible.
Oh my word, yes. So I didn't really care for Who's the Boss, although I found everybody likable on the show. I just wasn't a big watcher of Who's the Boss. I wanted to date Alyssa Milano, I think, at that point, probably in my life. But
we all did.
Yeah, there's a great Nova episode with Carl Sagan, and I think if I could get past the fact that nobody else in my house would want to watch it, I think I would have watched that episode of Nova at 8:00, and I would certainly watch it now when I am really the leader of my home, and also my wife is really into astronomy and science and things like that. So I really found the right woman for my TV programming.
This one's especially weird, too, that I should mention this Nova. It's not only Carl Sagan, it's Carl Sagan interviewing George Kieślowski, who was one of the guys that helped develop the A-bomb.
Yes.
And they're talking about him developing the A-bomb and his efforts to, quote, undo what I did.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing, I just read this play. I have to recommend it. My highest play recommendation, which is 10 Gulman's. I think that you've heard of it because you've heard of everything, but it's called Copenhagen.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So it's about Niels Bohr and Heisenberg the A bomb and World War II and Denmark and Germany. It's about everything and anything, and it was riveting. I mean, I read it. It's only 100 pages, but I read it in a night, and I seldom can read something in its entirety in one night. So I give it my highest recommendation.
I forget which guy it was. It might have been Heidelberg, but I read his autobiography, and there's a chapter where the night before they're going to test the first A-bomb, they have to have one of the scientists with the bomb at all times. And he had to sleep next to it for the night. And this chapter is him writing in the dark in the middle of the desert, because it was like up in a tower, sleeping next to this bomb and just thinking about not knowing what this is going to do. And then in hindsight, how it just changed the world in his view for the worse. And it's just this fascinating, the book's great, but just that one chapter alone is this like dark night of the soul of this guy who really had one. And it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, all of the philosophical and metaphysical implications of this, but also they go into and I know very little about physics, and I just remember the just being blown, just not being able to conceive of quantum mechanics and quantum physics. And anyhow, it was over my head, but I was still able to enjoy it despite that I'm not a physicist. Okay, so at 9:00, the thing to watch back then, and I seldom watched it because I would resist things that were too popular. So part of the draw with Newhart was that not a lot of kids were watching it, so I could be by myself and be able to judge people who weren't able to converse about Newhart. So Moonlighting was really hot at that time, but just I didn't need to know that there was a guy as cool and handsome and funny as Bruce Willis. That was not helping me at all, and it was just going to rub it in that he was this talented, and also that there was a thing going on, and we didn't. I don't know that we got to the night when Max Headroom was on, but there was this thing going on, and I don't know how old you were when you decided you were going to be a comedian and a writer and a performer, but I knew at 17 that this is where I wanted to wind up. And Max Headroom and Moonlighting were two shows where I was like, well, if everything becomes like this and cool and hip and technologically advanced in the case of Max Headroom, then the entire field has been closed to me before I even get there, because this is not for me, and it would just bum me out. So I would avoid shows like Moonlighting.
So you feared like a future of automation? You were like afraid of AI?
I feared that everything was going to be Max Headroom, and I wanted to do jokes. I didn't want to learn about computer science in order to tell them. And so, I mean, it's very telling that or interesting, because I had to have changed my mindset that I didn't resist the alternative comedy scene, and I haven't resisted sort of the internet aspect of it, but I did resist Max Headroom.
Which is a show about a resistance, oddly. So.
Right. I knew that I didn't know I was going to be in this business, but I was not going to be left behind. So let's move to. Are we at Wednesday now?
Wednesday, yeah. And weirdly, on Wednesday, speaking of AIDS, which is not something I say often, there's an after-school special on that afternoon at 4 p.m., and it's called Just a Regular Kid, an AIDS story. And the ad says, he likes pizza, basketball, and girls. He's a typical 16-year-old boy, except for one thing. He has AIDS.
Oh.
And I talked to Katie McLean, who's in this particular special, and it's interesting because these are very cheesy, and the after school specials, and talking to people who are in them, they knew that, and the producers knew that, and they almost leaned into it because they knew kids, especially teenagers, would sort of watch these ironically or hate watch them, but they would still get the lesson from it. They would still get what they were trying to get across.
Horse.
Yes, and that blew my mind because I was like, of course, because in 1987, clearly producers were cool enough to know that like 16-year-olds are going to think this is lame, but they're still going to watch it.
Yes. This is very interesting because I wanted to talk about the after school special with you, and because it's something that I need to address in my book, and I wanted to see if this makes sense to you, because I was a passionate. I'm doing this thing now where I resist using the word obsessed, because I think obsessed has this negative pathological semantics to it. And so I say, I'm not sick. I love this.
It's a good obsession.
Yes.
It's like the perfume.
Yes. My comedy is not an obsession. I love it. I love, not my comedy, but I mean comedy. The comedy to me is a love. I'm passionate about it. It's not affecting my home life. It's not affecting my relationships.
Got to get that comedy. I need it. I need it. Yeah.
Right. It's not a pathological thing. It's a love and a passion. So what I'm getting to with my love for the after school special is, if you are an earnest kid when you watch the after school special, I think it makes you an over empath. So that I was constantly seeing the show every week and would open it. I remember a kid who was developmentally challenged and was teased. Another kid was hard of hearing. Another girl was the daughter. It was called Dinky Hawker. You remember this?
Oh yeah. Okay.
And it was with Peter Scolari's girlfriend from Bosom Buddies. What is her name? She was in Back to the Future.
Yep. She's passed away. Her name is oh my God, why am I forgetting? Wendy Jo Sperber.
Yes. So talented.
Hilarious.
So lovable. So funny. And she was beautiful. And she was Dinky Hawker, whose mother counseled drug addicts. And there was really no there was nothing to resonate with me. My mother didn't counsel drug addicts. My mother wasn't really an activist at all. And Dinky Hawker, I think, felt neglected by this woman who was paying more attention to her troubled youth. And there was not a single episode, including an episode where a girl wins the lottery, on the after school special, that I didn't cry at the end of. It got to the point where just the theme song and the opening credits would make me cry. And after school special, if your aim was to make me feel, then mission accomplished. After school special, you imparted in me an empathy that to this, it's. We all recognize Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers, the Electric Company. I don't think people give credit enough or don't celebrate the after school special enough, because it really, and it was melodramatic and it was corny, but I think it was an important program. Thoughts?
I agree. I was the same way. In any show that had a very special episode, especially if it was one, because every show had this episode where a kid got unmercifully picked on because they were developmentally disabled or they were deaf or they had a disability. And I didn't have one. I didn't know anyone that had one, but I would be so mad on their behalf as a kid, and I would feel so terrible for them having gone through this thing, and I would cry. And I've noticed, and I don't know if this is the case with you, I have had siblings pass away, parents pass away, never shed a tear. And I'm not like, yeah, good, but I wasn't moved to tears. But if I watch an episode of something, I'll cry like a blubbering idiot. And it's weird how I don't know if those things like that rewired my brain to be like a main line to emotion, or if for whatever reason, I connected with those. But yeah, totally. It's for whatever reason, it's so much easier for me to tap into that thing watching something like that than in real life.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and there are situations where I once I am able to convert the situation into a dramatic scene, pictures, ideas. That's when it knocks me over, or sentences or memories, and it's there's sort of a wall there. Yeah,
you have to sort of translate it into a show,
a narrative. Yeah. That's really interesting and very once again very insightful. So I'm glad we were able to discuss that. Now, are we at Wednesday?
Yes, Wednesday. Yep.
Okay. Highway to Heaven.
That would sometimes fall into that after school special category for me, where episodes would make me sad. But every episode of that show was, I feel like every other episode was a kid with Down syndrome, something about the Special Olympics, and evil developers. It was like every other episode. It was like, we got a Highway to Heaven.
Yeah. It's just very interesting to me that I needed a fix of wholesomeness halfway through the school week, and Highway to Heaven was it. And I remember also frequently coming home after school and watching a half hour of Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers. I just needed some wholesomeness, and I was not into Perfect Strangers. I had friends who really loved him, and I recognized the brilliance of those performers. But I needed Michael Landon's kind, thoughtful, or at least seemingly energy. And then I would have been torn because I wanted to watch Head of the Class, but then at 9:00, and this show I'm discovering now for the first time in this TV guide. And I was a pretty big TV head, so this show must have been short-lived, but it was called Bronx Zoo.
Yes, with Ed Asner.
Yeah, and this particular episode, there's a basketball team featured, and Debbie Allen directs, and Norm Nixon, who's her husband and a former Laker and Clipper NBA All-Star and possibly Hall of Famer, he was on the episode as well. And I think that I would have been blown away by that show because I was a huge White Shadow fan. Now, this was just an episode that focused on basketball, but it seems like it was a school show, which is right up my alley, and also New York based. Now, if they'd set this in Birmingham, Alabama, we're not interested.
Yeah.
But Bronx Zoo is just I don't know how that I missed this show.
It was a mid-season replacement in 1987, so it only ran from January to June. And actually, this week, which is June, September, January to September, so September 10th or whatever this day is, this is actually the last time it aired. So wow. This is the last one. So it was an hour-long dramedy, and it was Ed Asner as like a tough teacher who goes into a school for delinquents in the Bronx and treats the kids like humans, and everyone else is like, you're crazy, which was a whole genre in the 80s. We had like Teachers with Nick Nolte, and then you had like The Principal with Jim Belushi and Lean on Me and all these shows. And this was kind of capitalizing on that. But Ed Asner is one of those actors that has that weirdly unique quality about him where he seems very comforting and very empathetic, but also he's not going to take any shit. Yes. Like, Ed Asner will fuck you up if he has to. And I've never seen him do that, but he has like an authority, but he also is like this open sort of, nice guy who wants to help people. And it's a rare quality with an actor that he has.
It's interesting to examine because, I mean, early on in my career, I became aware that television was an extremely efficient medium. You had to get who this character was right away. And because I didn't look the way I am, I struggled for a time, and we had to do a lot of explaining. But anyhow, I know that Ed Asner got the role on Mary Tyler Moore because of how he sounded, looked, and everything like that. But then he also built on top of that efficiency that you knew exactly what you were getting based on Ed Asner from there on out. So that, I mean, he does the voice on this show that I can't get enough of called Boondocks.
Yes.
Which I think it's the edgiest TV series I've ever seen in my life. Anyhow, he plays this sort of the Mr. Burns of the Boondocks world, only in some ways he's even more vile. He's certainly more racist than Mr. Burns. And anyhow, as soon as there's always part of me that reacts when somebody who was old when I was young passes away, that I think, oh, I wouldn't have been surprised if they said, oh, they passed away 4 years ago. And when I saw Ed Asner on Karate Kid sequel, well, not sequel, but
Cobra Kai,
the Cobra Kai,
who he's great in.
Yeah, I was just so thrilled. He's amazing. He's still got it.
Yeah, he's 94, 95. He still pops up and stuff. He was in The Good Wife. He actually, right before lockdown, so in like February, he was doing a play in Arlington.
You mean Arlington?
Arlington. In Arlington Heights. He was at the Regent Theater.
Way.
Yeah, and he was just a play he really likes. Because he doesn't need to do a play.
No.
But he wanted to do it. And so he flew in, did this play for the weekend, and flew home. Just because Ed Asner's 94 and he feels like doing it.
Oh, my word. That is it. That is great information, man.
There's also an amazing documentary on that night, and I don't know if you noticed it, but this is on channel 33 and 39, which is the PBS station, and it's called Stephanie. And it's a portrait of Stephanie, an intelligent and unmotivated Cambridge, Mass. High school senior who's in danger of failing math and science, mainly because of poor attendance, and consequently may not graduate. Her divorced parents don't seem overly concerned, and the school's officials can't get through to her. Stephanie's year unfolds via interviews with this 18-year-old. So they followed this Cambridge, Mass. girl through her entire senior year and did a documentary about it in 1986. Wow. And I've never seen this, but I am like dying to see this.
Oh, yeah, of course. You know, the PBS did this documentary also in Cambridge about Patrick Ewing during Patrick Ewing's senior year of high school, called Pat Ewing and American Dream. And it was so well done. It was so inspiring, and they really did such a great job with that. So, yeah, the PBS documentaries were, I mean, we've loved documentaries since we knew what they were, and it just took the rest of the world so long to catch up on that. So at 10 o'clock, I always watch St. Elsewhere, which I don't know if it would hold up, but it seemed at the time, the thing that I always complained about growing up with television programs were that they weren't edgy, gritty, or honest, or authentic. And I really thought or saw St. Elsewhere as this really like adult show, that they weren't going to hide any of the rotten things of life from us, and also they were also going to make us cry every episode.
Yeah.
And there was a character, Dr. Westfall, who was just, even though he's a doctor and maybe head of surgery or just one of the administrators, he had a son with Asperger's, and he was a mensch, but he was also, he had kind of I won't say Willy Loman, but he was just forlorn, and his life was just a wreck. And the man, he reminded me so much of, if the show aired now, it would be Richard Schiff, Toby from West Wing, who would probably play him because Toby says a word and I want to cry. And it was the same thing with Dr. Westfall. He was just a heartbreaking character with this heartbreaking life.
Do you remember the final episode?
Yes.
So people know this, but the child that doctor has is a kid with autism, and they reveal that the whole show takes place inside this kid's mind. Somebody on the internet spent like a year researching all the shows that touched St. Elsewhere. So characters that crossed over, things that were mentioned, and they made this chart showing all of these shows that must take place in this kid's head, and it's like 400 shows because it's like a whole NBC lineup. It's amazing. Two things I want to mention. One, that against St. Elsewhere, which also took place in Boston, is The Equalizer, which is a fun show that I always liked. This particular episode is kind of a special episode because in the mid 80s, because Letterman was so popular, Chris Elliott was like a not an in-joke, but like producers and hip people loved Chris Elliott, and they'd cast him in things that were wildly inappropriate for him. So like he was 26 or something, and he was in a Miami Vice playing one of like Crockett's. He was like Vietnam War buddy. Yeah, he's in The Abyss. He's in Manhunter. He's in this Equalizer episode. And the character name, I need to ask him if he did this, but there is no way he didn't get them to change his character name. And he clearly came up with this character name because the character played by Chris Elliott in The Equalizer is named Rags Maloney, which is such a Chris Elliott name. Like, there's no way that he didn't come up with that.
The director of my special reached out to him because we were obsessed with Get a Life. And I wanted to use a line from the gang episode of Get a Life to open the special. And so we reached out to him. Chris said he didn't remember saying the line, have it. It was just 2 words. It was, you came, which is how I opened the show. And then he said, Gary can call me anytime he wants. And I called him, and then we became like talking all the time friends. And
he's just in Connecticut. His dad is a Boston guy. Like, he's the nicest. Yeah,
he's just so. People always say don't meet your heroes, but meeting him has been such a great joy. He's really a lovely man.
Yeah,
I'm so glad that he knows you, because I knew he would love you.
Yeah, and Adam Resnick, who's his writing partner.
Yeah, we became friends with him too.
I love Adam. Adam's done the show, and Adam's such a good dude. And for years, Adam was so traumatized by Cabin Boy, legitimately. Yeah.
I know.
And so he's come around, but for years, whenever anyone would mention Cabin Boy, that they love Cabin Boy, I would instantly text Adam. And even if it wasn't anyone he knew, I'd be like, this guy just told me he loves Cabin Boy.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, oh, cool. Like, it was just like, I got to tell him because he needs to know. Yeah.
Adam wrote the funniest book I've ever read, called Will Not Attend. And it's just, I mean, to laugh out loud, rereading it, that is something. I mean, it's just, I can't recommend that enough. It's just such an incredible book. So I'm so glad you brought up The Equalizer so that we can fan out on the Resnick, the Resnick
Rags Maloney.
Yeah, I mean, that is, we have to ask him that.
Yeah, and then also after that documentary about the girl in Cambridge, on PBS at 10 o'clock, there's a documentary called Headache, the Ancient Enemy. A report on the causes of headaches and treatments, including painkillers, diet, and hypnosis.
Wow.
Sounds pretty cool.
But imagine if you were suffering from a headache for years and had to wait for that show to air before you could address it.
Oh, painkillers? I had no idea.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. It's an entire industry.
So that is Wednesday. What'd you do on Thursday?
Okay, so Thursday I decided against watching the Cosby Show out of just knowing now. Yeah. But I really think at this point in the Cosby Show, I felt once Denise left, it wasn't the show for me because it became too Rudy centric. I felt and that used to, it was too cute. And so I loved this show called, and I'm sure you liked it too, Sledgehammer.
Oh, Sledgehammer is great.
Yeah. So fun. But then I was kind of interested in this movie called Doc, which is about Doc Holliday and is an effort to debunk the Old West legend of Doc Holliday, which I I didn't know that there were two sides. I thought just Doc Holliday was really cool and had consumption, but they're telling us that there's more to it than that.
He wasn't all that. Sledgehammer is, you may or may not remember this. First of all, the woman who played Duro, who was his partner, Anne-Marie Martin, she wrote the movie Twister.
No way.
And so this episode, Sledgehammer was on for 2 seasons. This episode is the final episode of the first season. They're repeating it because season 2 starts the next week. And Alan, I forget Alan's last name, but he created Sledgehammer. He was sort of a boy wonder. He was really good friends with Andy Kaufman, and he was mentored by Mel Brooks because he used to hang around on the set of all these movies.
Not Alan Zweibel.
Not Alan Zweibel. It's Alan... I'm blanking. I'll think of it later. But he created the show. And so he thought this show was going to get canceled. So the last episode, which they thought was the last episode, which is this episode that's airing.
Oh, wow.
Sledge tries to go and defuse an A-bomb. Speaking of A-bombs. And he fucks up and it blows up all of Los Angeles. That's how it ends. They all die in an A-bomb explosion. So he goes, cool, we did it. And the network calls him and they're like, you got a season 2. And he's like, so what they did was didn't change anything, but season 2 is called Sledgehammer, The Early Years.
Oh, no way.
So it's Alan Spencer. That's his name. Alan Spencer.
Okay.
And Alan's a famous, he does a ton of script doctor work. He has for years. He still does a lot of stuff. But yeah, so they just made it The Early Years and pretended it took place before season 1.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's a Sledgehammer thing to do.
Yeah, it really is.
So then at 8:30, I would watch This Old House. The attic is insulated because I enjoy that. But then
I always liked that it was local too. And when I was growing up in Melrose, I think it was the 3rd season of This Old House was the house in Melrose. And so I would go watch them film it. And I've rewatched, because if you get the This Old House app recommended, it has every episode. You can watch them whenever you want. And I rewatched these episodes, and I forgot that the Melrose one, typically, because everyone I grew up with was an asshole, it's really contentious because Vila's mad that the house owner won't help. And it's like not, we're so used to reality TV where they create these things, but this is a real issue they're having. And so him and Norm Abrams are like, hey, you want to come over here and do some of this? It's your house. Like, it gets really contentious, and it's so entertaining. It's great.
Oh my gosh. It was so weird because I bought into the whole Norm Abrams, Bob Vila, that they were just regular dudes. And I mean, I guess Norm was, but I just, the whole thing seemed real to me.
Have you ever met Vila?
No, I met his replacement one time at my eye doctor. He was nice, but I met Vila. You have?
Yeah, he still lives around here. And
really,
weirdest thing ever, when I used to live in London, I was flying home, and on the plane randomly was the Mighty Mighty Bostonians, who I was friends with. They were like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I'm flying home. And Bob Vila. So the plane was like me, them, and Bob Vila. So I get home and I'm telling my roommates Bob Vila was on the flight, and they're like, oh, it's really weird. And the next week, my roommate comes back from jury duty, and he goes, guess who was on my jury? Bob Vila. And he goes, and he got real mad that we didn't make him the foreman. He got pissed. He was like, oh, Bob Vila, of course I'm going to be the foreman. And they were like, no.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's my Bob Vila.
It's interesting because they rejected him because he was a Hollywood big shot.
Yeah, he doesn't know the common man struggle. He can't be in charge of this court case.
Intellectually. So at 9 o'clock, I mean, Cheers. That was probably my second favorite show behind Newhart. I felt that Newhart was for me. Cheers was for everybody, but I couldn't. It's irresistible. It was
amazing.
Yeah, it was irresistible, and it was one of those things that connected you back then, which was one of the great things about television, was that you could see that show and then have some pretty good small talk for the rest of the week with people and family members that you would run into, and there was there was a shorthand, and so it was really something. And again, we were so lucky that This Old House and St. Elsewhere and Cheers were all set in Boston. I mean, that we were really in the right place at the right time. And
Cheers, which I rewatch often, I don't know if you do at all, but it gets better every time I watch it, and I notice so much more. And I had Ted Danson on, and Ted said one of the most amazing things that everyone, like, I got so much email from listeners where Ted said, the thing about Sam is that he's never going to be happy. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, I played him this way because I realized his name is Sam Malone, which I interpreted as Sam alone. He's always going to be alone. And I was like, that's amazing. And I talked to him about the weird dynamic that I think I subconsciously picked up on as a kid, especially as a kid with drunks in my family, and I would be at bars a lot. But that show is a show about alcoholics. And the bar is this great equalizer where you have literally a mailman and a doctor sitting next to each other because they're both alcoholics. And Sam is the only one who's sober. Right. And he is sort of using it as a way to feel above everybody because he's insecure about himself and his sort of failure as an athlete. And it's this fascinating dynamic when you watch the show with that in mind, because he's friends with everybody, but he still has this thing over them. And it just blew me away. I'm like, and it's all in the show. It's not like, it's there, like it's intentional. It's in there, and it's really layered for an NBC sitcom.
Yeah. I mean, it's the pilot. I don't know if you've probably read it. Poking the Dead Frog. Is that the book? So 4 or 5 of the writers within that book mentioned the Cheers pilot as the template, the Rosetta Stone, the touchstone or whatever for writing comedy. But the other thing is that one of the first big laughs I got from a modern adult joke was in high school, making fun of the Cheers theme because I didn't really understand the layers of it. I was saying, this is the funniest show on television, and the theme song makes me want to kill myself. And I would act out the theme song, and the guy is taking it. And so, I mean, and that's a joke I can still do today because everybody identifies with it, but I got good laughs on it at 16. And I always think about the fact that, yes, that show is about lonely alcoholics. It couldn't be any more depressing and melancholy, but it shows you, and it's that Twain quote, which is our only weapon is laughter. Yeah. And that's what these people are able to use. They make each other laugh, and also it crosses over with Piano Man. They're sharing this drink they call loneliness. They're all just lonely, lost people, and yet they have family there. And it's I mean, the AA works, I think, because it takes away a lot of the loneliness, which I think is part of the predicament. And also, I think Cheers worked for those people. That bar within that reality worked for them because they weren't as lonely.
Yeah, I mean, when people call it a workplace sitcom, I'm like, no, it's a family sitcom. It's the family they chose. And it makes sense that the pedigree of people who created that show came from shows like Taxi, which is also very similar, which Taxi's not a workplace sitcom either. It's about people. No one on that show is doing what they want to do, except for Alex, who just wants to drive a cab, but everyone else is stuck there. They want to be an actor, they're boxer, they're something else. Yeah. And they form this sort of family. And it has that melancholy quality of no one's happy where they're at, but they're kind of just getting by.
Right, and it's also interesting, and it's something that I've sadly come to realize, is that anytime, and I'm sure there are exceptions, maybe I don't know, but usually on Cheers, when the real family enters the scene, they ruin everything.
It's terrible.
They are Yeah, and it's no coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah, you know why these people have problems.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So and then at 9:30, I would watch Night Court, and
I love.
Yeah, I loved Marky Post, and I loved Harry. I loved John Larroquette. I loved Bull. I mean, it was a really special show, and it had a lot of the Cheers vibe, but it was also a little bit sillier.
Big time.
And I loved that show. And then
as a tall person, you may appreciate this bit of trivia. Night Court, tallest cast in history.
Really?
Because John Larroquette was
like 6'5", right?
6'4", 6'5". Richard Mall's 6'6". Harry Anderson was 6'3". Charles Robinson was 6'3". Marshall Warfield 6 feet tall.
Wow. And also there was kind of a curse with the bailiffs.
Yep. Yeah.
Selma
Diamond
was I think Selma Diamond was the first. She was incredible.
And she was never a performer before that, really. She was always a writer. She used to write for Your Show of Shows, and she wrote for Sid Caesar. She was a vaudeville comedy writer. She used to write stand-up in the 60s, and so they cast her as that character, and she's great, but then they realized, we keep casting old ladies. They're going to die.
Yeah, she was just perfect. She had that great voice and her manner, but there was warmth. I mean, she was just terrific. And I'm so surprised that she wasn't a veteran character actor. That is really interesting. At 10 o'clock, I would watch LA Law. Yeah,
you got to go Corbin Burnson.
Yeah, Corbin was great. And I don't know if Harry Hamlin was still on the show at the time, but I loved him and Susan Day. And then I loved Roxanne. That was Arnie's secretary, right?
Yeah, Susan Rattan. Yeah.
Yeah, she was just terrific. And there was one particular episode where she dated the guy who is the lieutenant on one of the Law and Order iterations, and he was obnoxious and he was rude to her, and she said something that really hit me. She was just like, I'm not one of these beautiful women, and I'm not thin, and this is what I can get. And it just was one of the most honest things in television that I had seen, and it just really moved me.
Yeah, she's a great actor and was perfect in that role and felt like a real person in the best way.
Yes. I think that a lot of the other characters were too slick and not believable, and I really connected with her, even though I'm not a middle-aged single woman.
Really?
And then so we'll move on to Friday.
Yes, final night of the week.
Yeah, which I was saying to myself earlier that on Friday, watching TV in high school was a bit depressing on a Friday. So I would usually try to, but I know that at 2:30 p.m. I would get home and watch. I probably got out of school at 1:40, so I'd be home at 2:30 to watch Scooby-Doo, which, for whatever reason, was this comfort cartoon that the mysteries were never solvable. They didn't give you the clues. The comedy was awful. The storylines were slapdash. They just had no respect for us, and yet I still can't resist if it's on watching it. It's just maybe it's the colors they used.
It's that 60s kind of monster fun, like
yeah.
And the voice of Frank Welker.
Yes, and Casey Kasem as Shaggy. I mean, it was a very comfortable show to watch. But I mean, I have very strong opinions on Friday night TV. I keep saying I hope I wouldn't have been home on this Friday night, but because of the depression that would involve. But
there's an amazing variety show on that night. I don't know if you saw it there, but it's a charity show for the charity CARE, which is the International Relief and Development Organization. And first of all, the title of it sounds super sarcastic. It's called Thanks for Caring. And the cast of people who are in this special, it's Robert Guillaume, Morgan Fairchild, William Shatner, Ben Vereen, the International Children's Choir, Pia Zadora, Hinton Battle, Alfonso Ribeiro, Rich Little, The Jets, The Fifth Dimension, Leslie Uggams, Reba McEntire, The Oak Ridge Boys, Gary Morris, Melba Moore, Harry Blackstone, Maureen McGovern, and segments on the organization's history presented by Whoopi Goldberg, Lena Horne, Elke Summer, Pat Morita, Yogi Berra, Cesar Romero, and Fred Allison.
Wow. That is, I would have to watch that.
Yeah. I mean, that's just a cavalcade of stardom on that night.
It would let us down. And I also recently read a book about Sesame Street read by Carol Spinney.
Oh, yeah.
And it's called Street Gang. And he was saying that Yogi Berra once spit tobacco on Big Bird's foot.
I believe it.
While he was on the Yankee Stadium field. And it just, oh, Yogi, you were completely full of shit with all your funny little quips. You spit on Big Bird?
Yeah.
Ugh.
That's like a Philadelphia fan level.
He's dead to me.
Carol Spinney, another guy from Boston, and it hit me later in life that Oscar the Grouch has a Boston accent, and that's perfection.
Only Boston could create a Grouch like Oscar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I found something at 8:00 to watch on Friday night, and it was let me see here. Yes, it was Moyers, and I'm assuming it was Bill Moyers.
Yep.
And In Search of the Constitution, and I'm certain I wouldn't have watched it because I'm interested in the Constitution at that age, but I would have watched it because I found Bill Moyer so comforting and thoughtful and smart, and I've always liked to listen to smart people talk. Now I wouldn't have watched Webster. I probably could have got. I mean, the Alf Loves a Mystery was sort of the cartoon rollout that I used to get excited for when I was younger. So I could have been talked into watching that, but basically it was Friday night was depressing for me because I would have not had anything to do with friends, and also there just wasn't a lot on for me at that time. I mean, I would have watched Columbo probably. That came on at 8:30 because I always loved a mystery, but I wasn't going to watch Dallas. Dallas was dead to me at that point. And then Miami Vice was another case where it was too popular for me to accept it. Anything that popular, other than Cheers, there was something wrong with it to me. I don't know how I got that. Is it snobbery or just distrust of the popular? But I wouldn't have watched that. The thing that I would have really gotten into, and I think you helped me out with this because I was searching for this, but Crime Story at 10.
Yeah.
That was a really special show ahead of its time, and it was a great gangster story. It was a great Vegas. It was sort of like Casino, not as well done as that, but it was it produced or directed by Michael Mann?
Yeah, Michael Mann produced it. I always describe it to people as Mad Men Miami Vice. So it's Dennis Farina, who I'll watch in anything.
Yes. Oh my word.
The cast is amazing. It's just a cavalcade of Michael Mann character actors. Ted Levine is in it, who plays Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and was great on Monk.
Yep, and it's just unbelievably good. The first season I like a little better, where they're still in Chicago. The second season they go to Vegas, but it's a great show, and it's currently streaming free on IMDb TV if you ever want to rewatch it.
Yeah. I took you up on that recommendation, and I watched the pilot recently, and I was blown away by how ahead of its time was. The only thing is that they clearly didn't have enough money to do it film style.
Yeah.
So that it was whereas Casino was able to replicate every aspect of that world. They had to fudge some things in it, and it stood out because we're so used to more elaborate things. But at the time, there was nothing comparable, I don't think.
There was no other period piece shows. You got a new version of The Untouchables the year after because of the writer's strike, which was another weird thing where it was a whole other story. But the networks realized the loophole that they could shoot scripts they already owned. So they did a new version of The Untouchables, but it was literally with all the old scripts. They did a new version of Mission Impossible, but it was all the 60s scripts. So, and stuff from the 60s, the scripts were old enough that they didn't have to pay the writers again for them. So there was all these new shows that were doing this stuff, and The Untouchables was one that was set in the 40s. But Crime Story beat it by a few years.
Yeah. Wow. What a gross way to get around labor laws. My word.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They were coming up with all kinds of crap on how to do that stuff. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But you passed up the MTV Video Music Awards that night.
The only thing I would watch on MTV at that point in my life was Yo MTV Raps. I again, MTV was too popular, and the bands that they were featuring were too popular. I resisted, and I would watch it here and there from time to time if there was a Springsteen video, or I remember there was a great George Harrison
got my mind set on you. Yeah,
late career video that was just a great video and a great song, and so I would tune in for that and some Billy Joel stuff, but I resisted the glam rock, and I also thought that the Headbangers Ball was garbage too. I was a very soft iconoclast.
Well, you're not wrong about Headbangers Ball. This was live, which was always kind of fun, but I also noticed that some of the presenters are Bobcat Goldthwait, Sandra Bernhard, Lisa Bonet, Dennis Hopper.
Wow.
It was a weird collection of people.
Was the MTV Video?
Yep, the 1987 MTV Video Music Awards at 9:00 live from the Universal Amphitheater on Friday, September 11th. And so that was always kind of exciting because, Saturday Night Live, obviously, but we didn't get a lot of live television when we were growing up. And especially the MTV Music Awards, because you're like, someone might say fuck. You know what I mean? Or like you're just like super excited to see what would happen, and nothing too crazy would happen. In '87, I don't think anything crazy happened. Although I think that might be the year that Bobcat Goldthwait came out and pretended to be Bono, which was really funny.
Hilarious.
But I always would watch that every year just because it was like something kind of exciting.
Amazing.
And that is the week. Anything else, or did you just end it off with Crime Story, which is a good way to end it?
Yeah, I would close it out with Crime Story and then probably cry myself to sleep.
Fair enough. Vincent Gallo's in this episode of Crime Story.
I couldn't get over that he's young enough to have been, or that he was old enough back then to be. He must have played like I just picture him playing somebody strung out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that's what he plays.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're watching in lockdown, or any comfort shows you've been revisiting, or anything you've been marathoning?
I will say that I watch an episode of Boondocks every day. My wife put me onto it over the summer, and it's just been a revelation. I got really into Westworld and was a little bit disappointed by the current season. I caught up on Better Call Saul, which I had missed when it first aired, and then the other thing that I watch regularly and have really enjoyed is a friend of mine. He directed my special. This guy Mike Bonfiglio. We used to do it every day at the beginning of lockdown, but now he's gotten busier, and I resent it. But we watch an episode of Get a Life every day together on the phone. And it's just we laugh so heartily and can't get over how ahead of its time it is.
Do you have a favorite Get a Life episode?
Yes, the episode where he tries to rehabilitate the gang of youths.
That one is just amazing. I love that one. I've been watching a lot of Bob and Ray stuff with Bob.
Oh, wow.
And actually on YouTube right now, what you may enjoy is in the SNL slot in 1978, they did a special called Bob, Ray, Lorraine, Gilda, and Jane. And it's Bob, Elliot, and Ray and the three women from SNL. And it's a 90-minute sketch comedy special. It's really, really, really funny and way ahead of its time. And that reminds me, when I talked to Resnick, he wrote the Zoo Animals on Wheels episode.
Yeah.
And the reason he wrote that is because Bob Elliott went to go see Cats. And when they come out into the audience, he was like, "What the hell? Get off me." Like, he was so mad about it that him and Chris thought it was the funniest thing. And so they wrote that episode about it because it literally was what happened to him, which I think is so hilarious. Funny. So funny.
Hilarious.
Yeah, I love that show. It's such a great show.
I think, I'm sure everybody tries to recommend people to you, but I think you would really enjoy Mike Bonfiglio. He has a similar sense of humor to us, and so if it's okay, I'd love to pass along your information to him.
Yeah, please do.
When he has time, because he's a TV head like we are, and has good taste.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, I'd love to have him. That'd be great.
And he'll really enjoy connecting with you on your memories as well, and also we love talking about Resnick, because now when we watch the Get a Life, we think, oh, that's something Resnick would say. That's a line that's so Adam or Chris, and they have their certain interests and excitements, and they seem to be really great at using different terminology for drifters and hobos.
Oh yeah, and they would get obsessed with, like, there was an episode where Chris is talking to his parents and he goes on this weird rant that doesn't make any sense, and then he ends it and he goes, plus tax.
Yes.
And they got that from Chris, and Adam were obsessed with watching weird footage of Elvis just saying nonsense and talking on stage. And there's one thing where Elvis is just literally speaking nonsense on stage, and then he goes in plus tax. And so they just used it because they used to say it all the time. And I love that it's like they're genuine friends, and so much of their stuff that they just find amusing would make its way into the show. And I just love it. It's the best.
Oh, that's so great. That's so great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I'm so sorry it took so long for us to get this happening, and I'm so delighted that I got to do it, and I can't wait till we can convene in person again.
Yeah, absolutely. The time was right now. This was the time we were supposed to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your patience and not giving up on me.
There you go. That's Gary. You know him. You love him. Can't wait for that book. I'll feel a very special place in my heart for the small part I played in helping him research that book. If you would like to research a book, let me know. I don't know if I can help you. If you have guests that you would like to have me try to get on the show, please email me at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or ken@icanread.com or at Kenneth W. Reed, R-E-I-D, or at TV Guidance on the social media. Also, you can go on the Patreon, patreon.com/TV Guidance Counselor. It is a huge help to putting out the show. I try to get each and every single guest request that you have on the show. And in fact, I would say 50% of the requests I get already been on the show, so I'll usually send you a link because we have like 500 episodes, so I don't blame you if you don't know they were on, and maybe I'll have them back on if it's been a while. I don't know. Anyway, I'll be here next week. I hope you will too, and we'll see you then for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor.
And the Boston accent is warranted there. You spit on Big Bird?
Yeah.
Ugh.